Americans, that they've been colonial nations, that they've exploited the third world, and that they've diverted resources that should have been more equitably distributed across the world and within their own societies for the benefit of a very small number of people. So that would be the counter position to the case that you were making.
That would, yeah, and it falls apart on really a basic scrutiny. So the idea, Marxists talk a lot about the distribution of resources. They never quite talk about the production of resources. And in fact, all of the Marxist systems throughout history, they're great at distribution, because when you have all of the guns, you can take things from one person, give them to another. They're really bad at production. And so you have a kind of failure of production throughout the 20th century that was really catastrophic for tens of millions of people. The United States actually has created a system of production that has raised the basic level of standard of living beyond the wildest expectations of almost anyone a century ago. And it's not out of exploitation. It's actually out of cooperation. It's out of the division of labor. It's out of having a price mechanism where you can exchange your labor, you can exchange your time, you can exchange your cash, you can exchange other goods in a way that everyone is winning. And so if you look at, even for example, to say, well, comparing it to the third world, if you look at the ancestry of all of the different populations in the United States, European Americans, African Americans, Latin Americans, etc., even down to the ethnic level, being a European in the United States, you are much wealthier on average than being a European in Europe. And the same holds true from all the other populations. And then this is the reason why people vote with their feet to come to the United States from all over the world. But it's also why when you ask people in survey data, and even anecdotally, I think this is true, across the board, people believe in the United States. And in fact, the only people who don't believe in the United States are left-wing whites that have high levels of education. And so when you ask African Americans, when you ask Latinos, for example, is the United States the greatest country in the world? People still say yes to a great extent. When you ask people if you work hard, can you still get ahead? That basic bedrock principle of the United States, they still say yes. Everyone except for people in the kind of upper crust of our elite institutions. And the same thing holds true when you talk about critical race theory. Manhattan Institute did a poll, for example, asking parents, white parents, black parents, Asian parents, Latino parents, do you think public schools should be teaching that the United States is systemically racist? Do you think public schools should be teaching the doctrine of white privilege? Every group, black, white, Asian, and Latino, they all said, no, we don't want this in our schools. And so the Marxists and then the critical race theorists have to develop this really sophisticated and almost absurd idea of false consciousness.
Yeah, they've internalized their oppression, all those groups.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And they're saying, the working class in the United States, the racial minority in the United States, all of the people who we know are oppressed, just as oppressed as they were under Jim Crow, just as oppressed as they were under slavery. They actually make this argument, which is just so absurd. They're really, truly oppressed. They just don't know it. And it's up to us to explain it to them. And even if they don't agree with us, we're going to change the entire society on their behalf. And so the really interesting thing, and I think the fatal kind of hypocrisy of critical race theory, is that these are the most privileged people in the world, the most privileged people in human history to a great extent, regardless of racial background, trying to impose their ideology on working class people of all different racial backgrounds who reject it. It's the same Marxist kind of jam that they get into. The proletariat, the working class, the racial minority doesn't want what they're selling. So they're just going to do it for them. I think it's kind of a reversal of their entire philosophy. It's a kind of intellectual imperialism that they use the kind of coded language of racial category that's really been totally disconnected from the reality of even race in this country.
Yeah, well, it's so annoying when the working class doesn't know what's best for them. And so let's take that apart in two ways. So one question might be, well, why is it the educated white upper class, so to speak, and I know this is more characteristic of white upper class women, by the way, than of men, why is it that they are the ones most likely to espouse these theories? And I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, there are perhaps two reasons for that. One is they will be the last people affected by the detrimental consequences of these theories because they're shielded from their effects. And number two, this is a deeper problem. You know, every system, every economic system that human beings has ever invented, every system of trade, which allows for cooperation, let's say, and for us to benefit from the different abilities of other people, has also simultaneously produced inequality. And inequality, although necessary, and I would say for some reasons desirable, because there's no real difference, by the way, between inequality and diversity, it also does put a heavy load on the conscience of people. You know, if you're a San Francisco upper middle class housewife, let's say, and you're walking down the street and you see it littered with homeless people, so to speak, who are suffering and who clearly are suffering and who clearly are marginalized and haven't been brought within the confines of the economic system for reasons that may be partly due to their own misbehavior, let's say, and inadequacies, but also partly because of sociological circumstances that were beyond their control. It's very, very difficult not to feel that your privilege and status is in some sense undeserved and also a moral burden, and very tempting, therefore, to cheaply counterbalance that set of guilt with the proposition that not only are you in a dominant position, but you're also firmly and 100% on the side of the oppressed, which is something you see happening in Ivy League schools all the time. And Rob Henderson, as you no doubt know, has described this proclivity as luxury beliefs, right? Is that you get to have your status, and then instead of doing what you should do to remediate the problems of the world with that status and privilege, you jump on the bandwagon of cheaply compassionate theories, and then you can have your cake, your moral cake, and eat it too. I've been trying to parse out the psychological reasons why it is precisely those who are in these positions of vaunted privilege, let's say, who are most likely to have these revolutionary ideas. Do you have any further thoughts on that?
A couple things. I mean, this is kind of a stock character in American history. If you look at the Weather Underground movement in the late 60s, early 1970s, which is really a kind of prototype for all the things we're seeing today. If you read their manifesto, Prairie Fire, and I highly recommend you read it, I read it last year and kind of my eyes popped out of my head because it's all of the things that K through 12 students are learning today. White privilege, anti-colonialism, kind of Marxist economics, etc. That was at that time a radical fringe idea that has now moved into the mainstream. But you look at the backgrounds of all these people, they're all elites. They're all people who are the sons and daughters of bankers and politicians and wealthy people in New York City, wealthy people in San Francisco. They were living on, houseboats in Marin while they were, planting bombs in police